A single rough-hewn block of pink-veined Candaglia marble sits heavy on the flat deck of a wooden barge, damp with the freezing spray of the Ticino River. It is late October in the year 1386, and this massive stone is traveling upstream against the current toward a construction site that will not be officially finished for nearly 600 years. The barge captain pulls through the autumn mist, straining against the weight of the slab that will eventually become a saint's shoulder or a gargoyle's wing. He navigates a complex network of artificial waterways that turns a landlocked settlement into a thriving port city, forcing the Alpine mountains to come to the plains 1 ton at a time. Stone defines the city's soul. Without this specific slab and the hundreds of thousands that followed it down the river, the iconic skyline of Milan, Italy would be unrecognizable to modern eyes. The city is a paradox. It is known for ephemeral fashion and fleeting trends, yet it is built on the heaviest, most permanent foundations in Europe. Long before the first marble barge arrived, the Insubers Celts stood on this flat, marshy ground and saw potential where others saw only endless mud and blinding fog. Belloviso, the legendary leader of the tribe, founded the settlement around 600 BC, allegedly drawn to the spot by a vision of a sow half covered in wool, a symbol that remains carved into the city's ancient arches. The Romans arrived centuries later to conquer the Gauls. They renamed the site Mediolanum, meaning in the midst of the plain, a pragmatic title for a pragmatic outpost that served as the vital hinge between the Mediterranean world and the wilder lands of northern Europe. Trade routes converged here instantly. By 286 AD, the strategic military value was so immense that Emperor Diocletian made it the capital of the Western Roman Empire, unceremoniously stripping Rome of its influence and turning this fog-bound military camp into the center of the civilized world. Emperors ruled from here. St. Ambrose, the formidable bishop and politician, walked these streets in the 4th century, establishing a religious authority that would often challenge the Pope himself, creating a distinct Ambrosian rite that the local church still follows today. The city grew rapidly. Brick walls replaced wooden palisades, and a massive circus for chariot races rose near the present-day Corso Magenta, capable of holding thousands of screaming spectators who bet on the colors of the drivers. Yet the geography remained a challenge. There was no great river like the Tiber or the Seine to flush away waste or float heavy cargo, so the citizens bent the landscape to their will with shovels and sweat. They dug ditches. They diverted streams. The Alona and Seviso rivers were channeled, tamed, and forced into service, creating a wet moat that protected the Roman walls from the invading Goths and Huns who eventually burned the empire to ash. Survival required total adaptation. The true metamorphosis of Milan, Italy began with a need for impossible luxury and a surplus of ambition. When Gian Galeazzo Visconti, the first Duke of Milan, decided to build the largest cathedral in the world, he faced a logistical nightmare that would have broken a lesser city. The Gothic style he demanded required marble, not the local terracotta brick, and the only source was the Candaglia quarries near Lake Maggiore, over 90 kilometers away. Roads were useless mud tracks. To solve this, engineers drastically expanded the Navigli, a massive network of canals that would eventually encircle the city like a watery ring road. Barges carried the stone. For centuries, these boats floated right into the city center, docking at the Laghetto di Santo Stefano, a small harbor built specifically to receive the cathedral's components. The marble was tax-free. Every block was stamped with the letters AUF, standing for Ad Usum Fabrici, meaning it was for the factory of the Duomo and thus exempt from taxes, a phrase that entered the local dialect to describe getting something for nothing. The construction site was chaotic. Thousands of stonecutters, sculptors, and laborers worked amid clouds of dust for generations, creating a city within a city that operated on its own laws and timelines. Then came the genius. Leonardo da Vinci arrived in 1482, not as a painter, but as a military engineer offering his services to the Sforza dynasty to improve the city's defenses and hydraulics. He obsessed over water. Leonardo studied the existing canal locks and found them clumsy, so he redesigned them, inventing the mitre gate, a V-shaped lock door that used water pressure to seal itself tight, a design still used in the Panama Canal today. Sketches in his notebooks show him standing by the Naviglio Grande, calculating flow rates and pressure dynamics, ensuring that the lifeblood of Milanese commerce could flow uninterrupted. The water brought wealth. By the late 19th century, Milan had transformed into the industrial engine of a newly unified Italy, a city of smoking chimneys and rattling looms where textile giants laid the groundwork for the future fashion empire. Innovation was constant. In 1883, the Santa Radegonda power plant began operations near the Duomo, making Milan the first city in continental Europe to have a public electricity supply, illuminating the Scala Opera House while London and Paris were still dim. But the city wanted more grandeur. In 1865, the city launched a contest to redesign the historic core, resulting in the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. It was a cathedral of commerce. Giuseppe Mangoni, the architect, designed a cruciform structure covered by an immense iron and glass dome, a technique that had never been attempted at this scale in Italy. It was dangerous work. Scaffolding towers reached dizzying heights as workers riveted steel beams that were forged in France and transported across the Alps. The project was cursed. Just days before the inauguration, Mengoni fell from the scaffolding of the main archway to his death, sacrificing his life for the city's drawing room. The tragedy only cemented the Galleria's legend. Then the sky fell. In August 1943, Allied bombers targeted the industrial capability of Milan, dropping thousands of tons of incendiaries that turned the historic center into a furnace. The Scala Opera House was gutted. 60% of the housing stock was damaged or destroyed, leaving the city a skeletal ruin of charred timber and twisted iron that smelled of ash for years. The silence was terrifying. Yet the cleanup began before the smoke cleared. The rubble from the bombed-out buildings was not carted away but piled up to create Monte Stella, a man-made hill that now overlooks the city, a literal mountain of war memories covered in grass and park benches. The post-war boom was explosive. Concrete mixers worked 24/7 as 15 new skyscrapers rose simultaneously across the financial district. Architects like Gio Ponti looked upward, designing the Pirelli Tower in 1956, a sleek blade of concrete and glass standing 127 meters tall, proving that Milan was no longer just a museum of the past but a laboratory for the future. Beneath the tires of the taxis and the expensive leather shoes of the fashion district, the old city still flows in darkness. Most of the Navigli canals were buried in the 1930s by the fascist regime to make way for wide boulevards and car traffic, sealing the water under asphalt lids in a quest for modernization. Today, urban explorers descend into the Cerchia dei Navigli. They find brick tunnels where the water still runs, silent and unseen, passing beneath the foundations of banks and luxury hotels, haunting the city like a phantom limb. The infrastructure is a labyrinth. The modern subway system, particularly the new M4 line, had to thread a needle through layers of Roman ruins, unexploded WWII ordnance, and the fluctuating water table that originally filled the moat. Engineers froze the ground with liquid nitrogen. This technique prevented the soil from collapsing as they bored tunnels just meters below the foundations of the Sforza Castle, a fortress that has guarded the city since the 15th century. Beneath the central station, there is another secret. Platform 21 was used during the Nazi occupation to deport Jewish citizens to concentration camps, a hidden loading dock located below the passenger tracks, designed to be invisible to the daily commuter. It is now a memorial. The city hides its scars. Even the utilities tell a story of power. The A2A district heating network pumps heat from industrial incinerators through 1,200 kilometers of underground pipes, keeping the damp Milanese winter at bay without the smog that once choked the skyline in the 1970s. There are other secrets too. Underneath the Piazza Oberdan lies the Albergo Diurno Venezia, an abandoned Art Deco underground spa built in the 1920s for travelers, complete with baths, barber shops, and manicure parlors now gathering dust in the dark. It is a time capsule. In the Church of San Bernardino alle Ossa, a side room is stacked from floor to ceiling with human skulls and femurs, a macabre reminder of the plagues that periodically wiped out the population and filled the cemeteries to bursting. These layers exist simultaneously. A subway train arriving at Cadorna station vibrates the ground above, shaking the dust off Roman artifacts buried just a few feet away. The skyline has shifted again, embracing the vertical. In the Porta Nuova district, the glass spires of the UniCredit Tower and the Diamond Tower reflect the changing light, marking Milan as Italy's uncontested financial capital. This is not just concrete. The vertical forest, or Bosco Verticale, designed by architect Stefano Boeri, represents a radical pivot in urban design, consisting of 2 residential towers hosting 900 trees and 20,000 plants on cantilevered balconies. It fights the pollution. A drone flying through clouds above the complex captures the leaves fluttering in the wind, a living skin that absorbs carbon dioxide and moderates the temperature of the apartments within. The scale is massive. The project required testing in wind tunnels to ensure the trees wouldn't rip free during a storm, and today, a team of flying gardeners hangs from ropes to prune the vegetation, dangling hundreds of feet above the street. Milan is growing greener. The old railway yards, abandoned for decades, are currently being transformed into vast parks and Olympic villages for the 2026 Winter Games, reintegrating the rusted iron scars of the industrial age into the living tissue of the metropolis. This is city life. Here, the architectural trio of Zaha Hadid, Daniel Libeskind, and Arata Isazaki have planted 3 twisting, leaning skyscrapers that look like they landed from another planet, surrounded by a public park that has replaced the old trade fair grounds. The economy drives this. Architects pointing at models of the future Scalo Farini project are planning to turn a massive rail depot into a green lung that will filter the air for the entire northern district. The logistics of the fashion industry are an invisible infrastructure of their own. Twice a year, the city transforms into a global stage, requiring a fleet of trucks, lighting rigs, and temporary venues that appear and vanish in days, a military-grade operation that generates billions in revenue. It is controlled chaos. Pedestrians crossing a busy intersection near the Scala might ignore the posters, but the city's economy depends on this biannual ritual. Milan is a city of relentless work. It does not bask in the sun like Rome or float in dreamlike stasis like Venice. It engineers its own reality, paving over its rivers to drive faster and building mountains out of its own wreckage. History here is useful. The marble of the Duomo is still being cut today to replace worn stones, a cycle of maintenance that implies this city will never truly be finished. It is a machine for living.